Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa. If you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. So I have a video today on ice cream. I got some questions when I did some in my food prep and stuff, and so I wanted to elaborate on it and share it with you in case you were interested in the ice cream machine that I got, which I'll put a model number up because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it is a compressor model one, so it refrigerates itself while it's churning. You don't have to freeze the bowls, which was the key reason for me buying it, because I never remember to freeze the bowls, but also you have to freeze them in between each batch, you have to have freezer room and all that sort of thing. So ice cream, now I make all my ice cream dairy free because we are dairy free, but you can just use cow's milk products if you so desire. So this is how I make our chocolate ice cream, and I made our basil ice cream, and I did homemade waffle ice cream cones as well. So I thought I'd share just in case you're interested in the process and might want to give it a go. It wasn't as complicated as I expected, the cones and stuff, so you know, I think it's worth doing. So enjoy watching and I'll see you at the end. So I love ice cream. It's definitely something I could have every day. I'm happy with flavored or just vanilla. I'm not fussy, but the kids can't eat dairy and I always feel bad buying it for myself when nobody else can eat it. Though I do make them smoothie pops and pudding pops and all those sorts of things. So it's not like they miss out, but I still, like, I might buy, or Darryl might buy me a tub and it'll last me weeks because I just have a scoop of a night time, sometimes with a bit of Milo on it or just on its own or whatever. So I always feel bad about it. So I started experimenting with the chocolate pudding pops and that kind of thing, but it still just wasn't quite the same. It still wasn't ice cream. It was, you know, chocolate pudding pops. So last Christmas, I almost bought myself an ice cream maker when it was on sale, but I didn't, and I regretted it. So this year when I found one at $150 off again, I decided to splurge. So it was $150 off at Costco, but it was $150 off $400. So it was still pretty expensive for a single-use appliance, but I splurged. We've been using it regularly, and whilst it has its pros and cons, the ice cream has been amazing. I use my Thermomix to make the custard bases, and I adore how simple it makes it. There's no tempering eggs, no straining custards or anything like that. I have experimented with some Philadelphia style ice creams as well, the eggless ones, and we'll probably lean towards them in winter when we have less eggs, but currently we have plenty of eggs, so I prefer an egg yolk custard based ice cream. Chocolate is one of our favorites. It's super simple. I throw in 100 to 200 grams of chocolate. This really depends on the percentage of your chocolate, how dark it is, how dark you like your ice cream and all that sort of thing. Like, you know, dairy-free chocolate comes in a range of darknesses. Lindt 70%, 85%, 90%, they're all dairy-free. And the darker the chocolate, the stronger it is, obviously. So I put the chocolate into the Thermomix and then I grind it up really nice and small. This batch I'm making, I did 200 grams, but it is honest to goodness dairy-free chocolate chips and they're quite rich. I definitely could have reduced it for this batch. The Kirkland chocolate chips though that I use sometimes, I use the 200 grams and that's just about right. They're a lot milder sort of a chocolate. Once they're ground up, I scrape the bowl down and add the rest of the ingredients. It's that simple. Now, because we're dairy-free, we're using coconut cream, but you can use any milk or cream of choice. Coconut cream has such a high fat content that it mimics cow's milk cream the best. We also have coconut in so many things that to us it doesn't really taste much like coconut at all anymore. It becomes complementary rather than startling. It doesn't taste like dairy-free ice cream to us, it's just ice cream. Now I like to make recipes in a way that they use up all the tins, so I don't have leftover coconut cream that gets put in the fridge and forgotten about. So I use 3 tins of coconut cream to a quantity of about 1.2 litres. I add some cocoa to bump that chocolate colour and flavour, around about 100 grams. Again, this can be preference of how chocolatey you want it. We like to eke this out and eat it in smaller quantities, so richer is better for that satisfaction of chocolatey goodness. I add a pinch of salt, I add some sugar, around about 200 grams. This again is variable. It depends on the sugar content of the chocolate you're using, though the sugar does help with the texture, so I wouldn't leave it out completely. This batch will make about 2 litres of ice cream once churned, and we get, I don't know, maybe 40 serves out of it, enough for 2 or 3 serves per person. So I'm comfortable with the sugar content as a treat. It's very definitely a treat meal. It's not a meal, a treat in general. I add in 8 egg yolks. Again, this is a little variable. You can add less, you can add more. It is going to change the richness and the texture to do so. I find 8 is a good number, but if I was short on eggs, I'd be okay backing it all the way back to 3 or 4 if needed. I cook it on 98 degrees for 10 minutes on speed 3.5. So you could cook it on a stove. Whisking the whole time, you want to temper your eggs. So anyone who's ever done it before, you want to warm up your milk, and then you've got your egg yolks. You pour just a tiny bit of that warmed milk into egg yolks and whisk it all up. Add a little bit more of that warm liquid into the egg yolks, whisk it up, and then you can add the egg yolks to the warmed milk mixture. Otherwise you're going to end up scrambling your eggs and it's going to just be a bit odd. After the 10 minutes, I take it off, give it a bit of a scrape to make sure that any chocolate bits aren't up the sides of the bowl, and then give it a quick whiz just to make sure it's blended well. After that, it needs to be chilled. I bought these white pint containers off Amazon and I really like them, but they're kind of expensive for what they are. Actually, I think I bought these ones from the Thermomix shop, to be honest, because they were on special 20% off Black Friday or something. But they're still fairly expensive, so I'm still figuring out other options for the refrigeration. I used a Pyrex jug this time for half of it, which is about the same capacity, and just covered it in cling wrap. It's not ideal though, because if things get put on top of it and all that sort of thing. The pint containers are amazing, they're just a little more expensive than I'd like for a single use kind of an item. While I had everything out, I still had enough basil put away for another batch of basil ice cream, and everyone really liked it last time, so I decided to do that. A quick wash of the bowl to get the chocolate custard out, and then basically the same process again. I pulled the clean basil leaves off and put them in the Thermomix. Added the sugar in as well. The sugar ratio here is a little bit higher as there's no sweetness from the chocolate chips and that sort of thing. So I grind the sugar with the basil so that we get as many fibrous bits ground down as we can. Of course, if I was a bit more pedantic about the basil I was putting in, that would be better too. But there's probably stems and stuff in there because I just, yeah. Once that's ground down into like a bright green paste, we add all the ingredients the same as the chocolate. I'm only doing a half batch here because of the quantity of basil required. So it's 1.5 tins of coconut cream, and I'll just have to remember to use that other half a tin. 4 egg yolks and a drizzle of vanilla. Cooked it for 8 minutes. It's a little bit less time because there's a reduced quantity. Again at 98 and speed 3.5. Then put it in a container to chill again. These decor glass containers seem to work okay as well. They're not as easy to pour out of though, but at least they've got a solid top and things like that. I left all 3 on the bench for an hour just so they could come down off boiling a little so that they wouldn't heat up the fridge, and then moved them into the fridge for at least 6 to 8 hours, but overnight is best. The next day I churned the ice cream. So I did the first batch of chocolate. You can see that it sets up into a pudding basically in the fridge with the addition of the chocolate chips plus the high quantity of egg yolks. It's very edible just as is, and I do use it sometimes. I'll whip it up, like I'll let it sit in the fridge and then I'll whip it up a bit and use it as a chocolate mousse for trifle, especially if you add a bit of gelatin into it. It definitely sort of whips up into like a chocolate coconut whipped cream, or mousse, which is really nice. There's a custard layer in like trifles and things like that at Christmas time, or with the pavlovas and that sort of thing. This is one of those fiddly things. This is one of the cons about the ice cream machine, getting it into the chamber. You need the churn in there so that you don't get the ice cream in the spot that it sits, and it can just be a little bit awkward, but you know, you just get it in there. The chocolate pudding's harder to get in there than some of the more liquid ones, but you know. Once it's done, we transfer it to a container for the freezer. These ice cream containers are a bit like the pint containers. I really like them, but again, they're just a bit expensive for their single purpose, so I don't know if I'd buy more. This too is one of the most awkward parts of the ice cream machine. You don't want it to defrost too much because then you lose that air that was incorporated, but it's kind of challenging to get it off the churn. It's also messy and it feels like there's a lot of waste, although you know there's plenty of kids willing to lick that churn. So with clean hands, I just scrape it all off the freezer container, and a spatula. Clean hands because it gets a lot of my hands, but I use a spatula to scrape it off, into the freezer container, also scraping the bowl clean where it has a thin layer of ice cream all the way around. Smooth it out and put it in the freezer to set up. It will be very soft for quite a few hours, so after a couple of hours is the better texture of it out of the freezer. If you leave it in there for 24 hours or whatever, you will want to leave it on the bench for 5 or 10 minutes before you try and scoop it out. I clean the bowl out to do the basil next. Now, a tip here, when you clean the bowl, make sure that you dry the exterior of the bowl before placing it in, because otherwise it will freeze to the chamber inside, which is fine, it doesn't need to move, but you have to wait for it to warm up again before you can remove the bowl. And as fiddly as it is to get the ice cream out with the bowl out, it's 10 times worse if the bowl's stuck in the machine. You know, ask me how I know that one. As you can see, the basil custard is much thinner, and this is due to the lack of those chocolate chips in there because they set the pudding up much thicker. If I wanted this as a pudding, I would have had to have added starch to the custard mix with cooking it or some gelatin or something, but this is ice cream, so it doesn't need it. Poured it into the machine and let it go again. That's one huge pro for the machine is the power usage is minimal. I believe it's rated at 150 watts, and because it has a compressor, you don't need to freeze the bowl in between. In fact, the second churning takes less time because the machine is already chilled. Once it was done, I transferred it into a container for the freezer. We still have peach ice cream in that other ice cream container, so I thought I'd see if it fit into one of these pint containers, seeing as the volume is increased during churning. It did, just kind of messily, but it did, and went into the freezer as well. The way we've been getting these ice creams to stay small portions is by serving them with something like in cones. We got cheap ones from the RGA in town, but I've also been experimenting on making my own. The beauty of homemade waffle cones is that they use egg whites, so I can use the whites from the ice cream to make the cones. The batter's pretty straightforward. It's egg whites, sugar, flour, and some melted butter, and it's just blended really well. I bought this pancake pen, I think it's called, for this purpose, thinking it would make it easier to put the right amount into the waffle iron at a time. I bought the waffle iron on eBay maybe, or maybe Amazon, I'd have to have a look, and it's been working perfectly. So once the batter was in the pen, I started heating up the iron. Now, my cooktop needs a bit of a scrub, but I don't cook on the cooktop. It's an outdoor burner, so no food ever touches it. So I only really scrub it intermittently to make sure that it's not a fire hazard. But being outdoors and used very heavily, it always looks pretty bad. Unfortunately, I did consider cleaning it just for this video or using the barbecue hot plate to not show this, but this is what an outdoor barbecue style hot plate looks like when you don't have to clean it to use it as a cooking surface. And you've seen my hooded barbecue, it can be just as bad because again, I don't actually use any of the surfaces for cooking. I bake in other containers inside the heat of the barbecue. So scrubbing down those surfaces, it's just not high on my priority list. So I pour about this much batter into the middle of the iron and let it start to cook. It's sort of like a 10 centimeter diameter circle. I check and flip it multiple times and try and get it nice and flat over the burner where I can. Once it has some color on it, I tip it off onto the board to shape. I'm still figuring out the shaping. We want the end pinched closed, but enough overlap that it seals along the side too. It's easy to shape while warm, but very warm on the hands. But as it cools, it gets harder and more crisp. So the aim is to shape it and get it all pinched while nice and warm, and then let it cool into the cone shape. There's definitely a bit of a technique to it, and I'm not real great at it yet. As you can see too, the edges seem to cook quicker than the middle, so there's some learning about when to take it off. I also was finding the batter was a bit thick, so I added a bit of water to thin it out, and it ended up with much quicker crisping cones, which had its pros and cons. They hardened up quicker, but they were also a little bit more fragile, and when they cooled, they were even more fragile, I suppose, which wasn't a bad thing. Like the texture of eating them was much like a store-bought waffle cone when they were done like that. So there definitely will be more learning to be had to get these right, and that, hey, who's going to complain about more ice cream cones? Though Sonnet did say that we could just do ice cream tacos, and we may look at that, just hang them over a dowel like you do corn tortillas to make taco shells, and then just have them like that. Darryl came and helped me a bit later, and we ended up doing 16 of them so that we had 2 sittings worth. I wanted to see how they held up if I put them in an airtight container once cold, and they did well. So that's a nice thing to know, that I can make a couple of days worth at a time, and they were really tasty. So even perhaps cooking them and slicing them in like pie shape things to use to eat as like dipping wafers might work really nicely. We'll have to see. Maybe it'll be nice at Christmas to use them in a bowl with something. I'm not sure. I'm just gonna play. The kids had a choice of ice creams today. Some of the peach was left, there was some chocolate, and there was some basil to pick from. So I'm sure I'll be making plenty more flavors, and in my food prep videos, if I manage to get them working this month, I'll show them as well, because it is a nice treat to have, and we do make it last. So one of those liters, we get, generally speaking, 2 servings out of maybe not quite 2, like 2 per person out of, sort of thing. Like we're managing to stretch it, and that's why we did the cones too, was to stretch the ice cream out a little bit by having the cones. If we were having it in a bowl, I'm sure it wouldn't last anywhere near as long, but that's the whole point of doing the cones, is to make it stretch. And I've got some of those small snack cones on my groceries, the delivery groceries from Coles, because I also want to make those, the cupcakes that you make in the cones and then put icing on to make them look like Christmas trees sort of thing. So we'll have some of those there too, and we can get them in town. Obviously getting 6 weeks worth of cones for 8 people is pretty impossible, and making them all the time is pretty impossible too. But we don't need to have ice cream every night either. It's nice, but we don't need it. So we will see how we go with that, and assess the quantities that we use. But I'm definitely going to try some more flavors, especially over summer. It's a summer treat. I don't make it in winter. It's December. I make lots of treats in December and make the most of it being Christmas month and things like that. So, but anyway, any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll keep on sharing recipes. And I really should get these up on my website, but we all know how well that's going. So thank you for watching again, guys, and I will see you on the next video. See you later.